My hype for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity before and after the game's release was like night and day. Having only played the demo prior, I couldn't wait to experience the prequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in a hack-and-slash styled spin-off. Sadly, after getting my hands on the full game and only playing a few hours after the demo, all of my hype died out. It was set up to be a prequel for Breath of the Wild, a game that would have expanded on the Fallen Champions, along with the War of the Great Calamity leading to what happened before Breath of the Wild's events. As a tale of this Great Calamity lacked in the original game, only being viewed through small cutscenes Link found as memories. So Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity would have been the perfect story to tell us about that gap we missed in Breath of the Wild's history. A game that would have acted as a love letter to those fallen champions that died before Breath of the Wild, giving us a chance to get to know them before the Great Calamity would strike as we know. But instead, the game ended up being a non-canonical fanfic that retcons everything that happened before Breath of the Wild and pretty much hits on the legacy of those fallen champions, keeping them alive and rewriting Hyrule's history. They baited us. Age of Calamity was supposed to be a heartbreaking tale that led up to Breath of the Wild. Instead, they created a new timeline where everyone wins and it's a happy ending. But why? They advertised the game as a prequel, making it seem like we would see the demise of those champions. But instead, they gave us some shamalama ding-dong twist and f***ed it all up, creating for this unconvincing story where Hyrule is saved, all thanks to this stupid pet guardian. This little guy somehow rewrites Hyrule's history, creating an entirely new timeline where Hyrule is saved. And I can't deny that this forced rewrite just seems so unsatisfying. Koei Tecmo really wanted us to like this Sheikah R2-D2, but no matter how OP or important this piece of shit is, I don't like him. Like you're trying to convince me that Zelda built this thing when she was 5. How? If the Sheikah were still relearning about their forgotten ancient tech, how did baby Zelda manage to build the most powerful Sheikah tech ever? Overall, Zelda's attachment to Teriko, along with how important Teriko becomes, is far too ridiculous of a story to get behind. Not sure what Koei was thinking, because canon or not, this story really sucks. For another example, you have to be bullshitting me if you're trying to convince me that the future champions were needed to save Hyrule. Tiba, Yunobo, and Riju don't hold anything compared to the original champions. Sidon though, that's another question. But let's be real here, these newer champions are meant to be the descendants of the previous ones. In reality, we don't need the two of them coexisting together. And let's be real, each of them are just slightly different than the original champion, filling up the roster with borderline copies of other characters, which feels extremely cheap, especially when you could have added other better characters like Suga, Purah, or even Robbie. Yunobo is just a bigger pussy than Daruk, and Daruk is afraid of dogs. Tiba is just a nice Rivali. Riju is just a midget Urbosa. And Sidon is just Mipha but sexy. So having the option of both just seem redundant and unnecessary. And you cannot convince me that Hyrule really needed those future champions, as when they show up to save their champion counterpart, they don't really do much until Link and Teriko are able to arrive, really making it seem that again, Teriko is the sole purpose behind Hyrule winning this time around. So why did Teriko bring him from the future to the past? Did we really need their help? I mean, they're not even worthy to operate the Divine Beasts yet. They're still learning of how to become their pilots. It feels like they were only added for fan service. That way fans of the new or old champions get what they want. The game that was meant to be the prequel to Breath of the Wild somehow merges Breath of the Wild's future with its past, which is not how anyone imagined the Great Calamity to play out. Now you may say, well, if they didn't change the story, the game would have been so predictable and simple, as it had to stay among the lines of Breath of the Wild's past and not stray from it. But what would be the problem with that? That's what the game was advertised. It was the Age of Calamity. And Breath of the Wild had enough events play out before the Great Calamity which were canon, so it didn't really need any other made-up events to add to the story. as even if the game just followed the memory cutscenes of Breath of the Wild, it would have had more than enough missions to play out the story. Like, this game would have made up for how lacking the Champions Ballad DLC was. Only having one cutscene of Zelda meeting each champion and not really showing us much else, with this game we could finally explore all of that in much greater detail and give these champions a proper goodbye. And it's not like they even managed to make the ending any better than Breath of the Wild's, even with all of Hyrule together. Calamity Ganon in this game sucked, if not more than Breath of the Wild's. He is a weird buff dude with Super Saiyan hair? It is honestly really unoriginal and makes the one from Breath of the Wild look so much better. It makes you really wonder what creative freedom they honestly had, because their direction for a non-canon ending and a non-canonical boss seems so much more lacking than Calamity Ganon ever was in Breath of the Wild. Like, imagine if we actually witnessed Hyrule's demise, making for such a tragic and heartfelt ending. And with the final mission, we are tasked to take the Master Sword to the Great Deku Tree, as what happened in Breath of the Wild, before Zelda then faces Ganon for 100 years until Link's return. In this quest, we play as Zelda with her powers awakened, facing endless hordes as we attempt to hold off Calamity Ganon alone. With at the very end it then teasing Breath of the Wild in the credits, letting you know while this journey ended in a dark way, there is a light in the distance that will come soon to Hyrule. Being the perfect prequel to Breath of the Wild, making you want to jump straight into that game. Instead, this game's alternate take only shits on the past of Breath of the Wild. Outside of Hyrule winning, we still know nothing new about the champions, nor have anything new to take from it. I mean, what did we manage to learn from the champions remaining alive? Has anything really changed? Even the character writing piggybacked so hard on the little bit of character each champion showed in the few Breath of the Wild cutscenes. For example, what we know of Revali in Breath of the Wild is that he's very bitter towards Link, as he's jealous that he is Hyrule's chosen hero. Well, throughout the entirety of Age of Calamity, he is nothing but bitter and hates Link. Literally nothing else, dragging that cliche even further.
Stop!
Same goes for Mipha, showing really nothing but interest for Link and how shy she gets. Or let's not forget Daruk and how he loves to eat with Link as mentioned in his diary. And how he's like a major douche with how many times he slams Link in the back. Like, that's gotta hurt, dude. Stop. And Urbosa, who calls Zelda
Little bird.
something already shown in a Breath of the Wild memory.
You little bird.
Literally nothing new, just saying the same thing and doing the same thing we've seen before. And if you thought that was redundant, have I mentioned that Link saves Zelda? You know, like that one time he did against the Yiga clan in that Breath of the Wild memory? Well, guess what? In Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, he does that last second heroic save towards Zelda again and again and again and again. Like, we get it. Link saves Zelda. How many times are you gonna try to pull this? It almost seems like a parody of itself with how many times they use this gag. So even with all of the freedom to write outside the game's canon, we got nothing new. Nothing. The champions who got retconned and kept alive are given no new content from what already was canon. And this just doesn't apply for the previous champions, but the future ones as well, as none of them were really worthy to help the previous champions. They were all still up and coming, unlike the original 4. So why did we even need them? Like, Teriko is pretty much the sole reason Hyrule was saved in this timeline. The other champions feel forced to be a part of the story just to please those who wanted to see them. But it really adds nothing special to them and makes no sense. Like, these champions come from a timeline that was already ruined, yet they're helping a different timeline from failing, but then are sent back to their f***ed up one. So why did these champions meet? Cause by the time Riju is born, Urbosa would have been dead. Same goes for Daruk and Revali when it comes to Tiba and Yanabo. Only Sidon and Mipha's reunion made any sense, as Mipha would have been around 100 years after. The rest of them would have never met regardless of what outcome Hyrule faced. But aside from the champions, future and past, my biggest issue is still with the guardian savior, Terrako. Overall, it seems that Koei really wanted Terrako to play a huge part in the game's story, while trying to have us gain some sort of attachment towards it. But it seems so hand-fisted, I can't help but hate this guy. Like, I felt no emotion for it when I broke it down, or after. It honestly felt like Koei was just really trying to make this guy the lovable companion we should all adore. But it backfired. This isn't gonna be the Sheikah R2-D2 of Zelda, no matter how hard you try. Terrako is so forced into the game's story, it is actually ridiculous. As after Link destroys Terrako in the final mission after it being possessed, the champions then gather around it and throw some sort of funeral, as they all seem to pay respects to Terrako, especially with how useful it was in Hyrule succeeding. Especially with how emotional Zelda gets. They really try to sell it to you that Zelda really had an attachment towards this little guardian. But who's to blame her, as Terrako helped so much with Hyrule turning things around. But now it's time for it to rest, and for Hyrule to do the rest. Right? Right? But no, nah, f*** that. Terrako still needs more spotlight, guys, yeah. As during the final battle against Calamity Ganon with all of Hyrule united, they still can't take on Calamity Ganon without Terrako's help. As during the battle, you are unable to do any damage to Calamity Ganon, as you wait until Terrako, who was just destroyed, comes back to life and runs in and explodes near Calamity Ganon, breaking his barrier. This then graces Hyrule with the ability to take on Calamity Ganon, because Hyrule is completely incompetent without Terrako apparently. Like, really? We already threw a funeral for it just moments earlier, yet it needed another heroic moment in the final battle? Like, was everything prior not enough? Like, why even need Link or Zelda with their power fully awakened if we still need Terrako? It really undermines the fact that all of the champions, present and future, have gathered together to take on Calamity Ganon, yet still need that piece of shit for help. And even after that heroic moment and its suicides, you think it's gone for good? No, as you can rebuild it in the quest right after. And it really is a shame how hard they tried to force this character into being a very integral part of the story. Altogether, Terrako is the sole reason Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity came out the way it did. And while I know the Zelda series has been known for time travel as it plays a role in most of their games, this wasn't the story to do it in, as this was meant to be the Age of Calamity. Why was the history rewritten and retconned? For what reason? Just to have it so the good guys have the happy ending? I mean, this would have been the one time where they could have broke that mold and really made something innovative, as it was advertised as a prequel that was known to be doomed. This would have been our chance to fully explore and learn about all of this history that predates Breath of the Wild that is only presented to us in cutscenes, properly telling us the story of the fallen champions and the events before the Great Calamity. Instead, this is an alternate take for those who couldn't handle the champions being killed off, making a standalone story that only uses Breath of the Wild's assets but has no connection to the story 100 years later. The gameplay, on the other hand, is like any other Warriors hack and slash. It's a massive grind fest of fighting endless waves of enemies with constant button mashing. It's really a hit or miss depending on your gameplay preference, and if you're coming from Breath of the Wild thinking you'll be getting a similar experience, you'll be pretty disappointed. I actually remember seeing the reaction of some fans who only played Breath of the Wild and then saw a gameplay for this, being completely surprised on how stiff and simple Hyrule Warriors gameplay is in comparison. So if the story wasn't good enough with it not connecting to Breath of the Wild, so is the gameplay gonna be very lacking with it being nothing like a Zelda game. It is far, far from it, but personally, I can welcome this change. Because honestly, I can enjoy its button mashing for what it is. It's like an endless rush of dopamine as I see my kills go up, slaughtering hundreds of enemies within seconds. It's actually something I welcome to the series, as I don't expect every Zelda game to be a full-on open-world dungeon crawling masterpiece. I actually really want more spin-offs like this, especially if they can explore more on the game's world building. So if you can look past the story and it not being canonical, the gameplay itself still really holds up and is actually really fun for something more simple in comparison to the rest of the series. Like, I can't deny that I did have a smile on my face with each level I took on, seeing Breath of the Wild's world, but this time in Hyrule Warriors style of gameplay felt kinda crazy to me, as the games looked so similar, but in gameplay they were so different. From the menu being a take on the interactive Sheikah map from Breath of the Wild, to the cutscenes looking like another memory Link would find throughout the game. The games are identical with their graphics, and the fact that I can enjoy more Breath of the Wild looking content, canon or not, open world or not, is still a huge treat when I consider Breath of the Wild to be my favorite game of all time. While the game's story only lasts about 20 battles, which can actually be beaten within a day if you're dedicated enough, there are tons, and I mean tons, of side quests, side missions, upgrades, and other things to grind on. It was actually kinda hilarious with how many new quests popped up after beating the main game story. It took more than 70 hours to 100% the game, yet surprisingly, I enjoyed most of that grind. While most of the missions can be done with Link, which is the most fun to play as, there are a fair amount of missions that must be played with the rest of the game's roster. And honestly, I dreaded most of those missions that didn't allow me to play as Link. As outside Link being most likely your highest leveled character, every other character has a much more limited playstyle compared to him. Link with his standard sword and shield is already far more OP than any other character, but on top of that, Link can swap to different styled weapons as well, from spears to double-hand swords, to sledgehammers to sickles. While every other character besides Zelda is only given one weapon style and that's it, with even a limited variety of those styled weapons. There is almost little to no customization to any other character besides Link. As outside the weapons even, there seems to be a lack of outfits with each character. Which is weird, because from a game that isn't canon to Breath of the Wild, why couldn't Koei give each character an outfit then? The original Hyrule Warriors, with it also not being canon, had a huge variety of outfits for each character, even if they made absolutely no sense. But in Age of Calamity, only Link is given the option for that. With the exception of Zelda after beating the game, that is. But this is only extended to her 2 cutscene outfits, nothing more. And the champions being given the ability to remove their champion scarves on and off. But aside from that, every other character seems to be lacking, which seems like a huge missed opportunity. Especially when the game isn't canon and they could have strayed away and done something completely different. Overall, there's a complete lack of creativity with each and every character besides Link, which really makes no sense for a Hyrule Warriors game, as Link shouldn't be treated as the only main character, but the whole roster should be given just as much attention. And even with the DLC, there seems to be no new weapons for anyone but Link and Zelda. And while there's still one last wave of DLC to come, I doubt this will manage to fix the lacking content the rest of the roster has. The one thing I really liked about the DLC is the fact that Zelda was given a new weapon, it being the Master Cycle Zero. This actually made her one of my new favorite characters after Link, as I can't deny it is so fun to cruise through enemies on the bike. So I really hope that this last wave of DLC is something similar for the other characters to help give them diversity in their gameplay. As it really did help with Zelda, as honestly I didn't play with her until getting the Master Cycle Zero. But regardless of what future DLC they have to add and whatever they already added, it will still not make up for the general disappointment this game came out to be. Overall, Age of Calamity could have been that prequel to show us that not all games need the generic ending of the heroes winning. It would have broke down the formula of games and done something different that I feel like people would have appreciated. This game was meant to be a prequel to Breath of the Wild, a love letter to the champions who've fallen. A story that was supposed to explore on the great events that happened before Breath of the Wild. But instead, we got nothing more but a fanfic that retcons all of Hyrule's history and on the champion's legacy.